They say diversity is the spice of life. On this edition of Business Africa, we have stories of hope, fear, and breakthroughs across the continent. Welcome, I'm your host, Afolake Oyinloye. Let's take a look at the major stories this week. Are we giving the threat of climate change the attention it deserves? We talk to experts about what has been done on the African continent to adapt the adverse effect of climate change. We highlight progress made at the Africa Investment Forum, including deals signed to improve infrastructure and create millions of jobs. In Uganda, a telemedicine company registered unprecedented growth and has now raised $5 million funding to finance expansion across the continent. The African continent has reason to worry about the effect of climate change, having been warned that the production of some critical food crops can be reduced as much as 50%. And yet, with all the global challenges like the Russian war in Ukraine getting all the media attention, there's a real risk that climate change continues to be overlooked. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, which brings together leading scientists on the subject, recently published a report whose findings can inform relevant and timely interventions.
In 2014, the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, projected the likely impacts that climate change would have on the planet and humanity. Its 2022 report emphasizes that the impact is already being felt in many places across the globe. With extreme heat deaths on the rise, more devastating floods, extreme weather events, and the planet getting warmer each year, scientists estimate that as many as 3.6 billion people now live in settings that are highly vulnerable to climate change. The African Risk Capacity Group, ARC, says the impact of climate change on food security, farming, and vulnerable communities in Africa can be mitigated if the commitments made to invest more than $100 billion a year are fulfilled.
How do we help Africa to be more resilient vis-a-vis the impact of climate change? And that is what we do at the African Risk Capacity Building, and that is to help Africans to plan, prepare, and respond to the effect of climate change, because that's one way of protecting the vulnerable communities on the continent.
The ARC Group adds that initiatives like the Africa Disaster Risk Financing Program, under which Madagascar received $10.7 million in the tropical cyclone insurance payout, are practical ways in which African nations can prepare for the worst effects of climate change. Tropical cyclone Batsira, which hit Madagascar in January this year, affected more than 124,000 people, with about 29,000 displaced and at least 121 deaths.
Patrick Vikoyan, CEO of Global Center on Adaptation, joins us for more on that report. Welcome to this show. Now, there are reports that the production of some food crops might reduce as much as 50% because of climate change. How accurate are these projections, and how worried are you?
At the moment, 1 in 5 people in Africa are going to bed hungry. That's double the proportion than any other continent on the planet. And that's completely unacceptable and inappropriate. Why? Because we also know at the moment, Africa is a net food importer currently at an annual bill of $43 billion a year, which goes up to $110 billion a year. Now, with climate change on top of this, what we will see is that food productivity, which has to go up, in fact, is going down over time. So what needs to happen is that the food systems in Africa, they need to become climate smart and climate resilient. For many Africans, it is adapt or die. The time to act is now indeed.
Now, what are Africa's most pressing needs if it has to address the effect of climate change?
One of the most important actions the African continent can take is twofold. One is to invest in the food systems to make it climate resilient. Early warning systems, drought-tolerant crops, digital solutions for farmers. We know the cost of action of this intervention. It's around $15 billion a year. But we also know the cost of inaction, not investing in climate resilient food productivity. The cost of that is $200 billion a year. So in fact, inaction is expensive and not the action part. Secondly, what is very important for the African continent to invest is in infrastructure. new cities, urban ports, highways, healthcare systems. We need to make sure that the infrastructure of tomorrow is also climate resilient and is protected against the shocks of tomorrow. What are the additional costs? 3%. Every infrastructure project which we make on the continent will be slightly more expensive. But what are the return on investments if you make that highway or port or healthcare system more climate resilient? Is a ratio 1 to 4. Every dollar or pound or euro you invest in Brazilian infrastructure has a $4 of dividend. So it makes economic sense to invest in Brazilian infrastructure. It's good for our health, it's good for our planet, but it also is good for our economy.
Now, can you share with us what your organization is doing to adapt the effect of climate change effects?
Together with the African Development Bank, the Global Center on Adaptation, which I lead, we have launched the largest adaptation program to date for the African continent, endorsed and supported by all African heads of state. What does it do? It invests in resilient infrastructure, it invests in resilient agriculture, it makes sure that the youth will get well-paid jobs in the adaptation space, and it will generate additional climate finance. African leaders have indicated that the adaptation finance needs for the continent as such, $33 billion a year. How much is flowing today is only $6 billion from north to south. The rich countries have promised many, many times over that $100 billion will flow from north to south, of which half would go to adaptation. This is no longer the case. Rich countries have to step up, and the time to act is now.
The time to act is now. Thank you so much for those insights.
Fantastic. Thank you very much indeed. I really appreciate this.
As part of its efforts to help the continent recover from the COVID-19 pandemic, the African Development Bank secured deals worth $32.8 billion, including a historic highway connecting West Africa's biggest cities of Lagos in Nigeria and Abidjan in Ivory Coast. These project plans were concluded at the Africa Investment Forum. We have more on what transpired at the forum, including interventions in the health sector, which was exposed severely during the pandemic.
Nearly 4 months after it was postponed because of health concerns and travel restrictions, the virtual Africa Investment Forum still delivered on its promise of attracting more foreign direct investments. The $15.6 billion for the Lagos-Abidjan Mega Highway was the largest deal secured at the 3-day event. The 1,200-kilometer highway will connect West Africa's 2 major cities in Nigeria and Ivory Coast and should be completed in about 6 years. Some see the project as long overdue and believe it could be a catalyst to boost intra-African trade, while others raised concerns about the sustainability of the project.
In what time frame are they looking to complete the project? And within that time frame, do they know what the anticipated volume of traffic will be with respect to the capacity of the road? At the moment, I think we're talking about a 4 to 6 lane highway. And within many of the West African cities, we've seen that highways of that size have very quickly exceeded their capacity and needed to be expanded up to 8 and 10 lane highways. Is that the risk that we're seeing with this project?
The investment is part of the bank's COVID-19 response, and all the deals were secured in critical sectors like agriculture and agro-processing, education, energy and climate, healthcare, minerals and mining, and information and communications technology.
The COVID-19 pandemic significantly boosted the demand and appreciation for remote access to healthcare, and for telemedicine providers like Rock Health in Uganda, the growth has been phenomenal, registering over 300% growth in the delivery of consultation, laboratory and pharmacy services. The company recently secured $5 million in series of funding to facilitate an expansion of its services across the continent.
Uganda hospitals typically have long queues of patients waiting to see doctors, have tests done in laboratories or get drugs from pharmacies. Rocket Health Organization set out to use technology to address these gaps in the healthcare system by setting up a call center manned by qualified licensed doctors. While COVID-19 pandemic disrupted many businesses, for Rocket Health, this was their biggest breakthrough.
What we'll have is we'll set up a hub, a medical hub that will have a clinic, a pharmacy, and a lab for testing, and we'll still be able to provide the last mile delivery around those areas. And it will not stop in just Uganda, because this is what we plan to do for the rest of the year. But then at the end of the year, or even beginning of 2023, we want to launch Rocket Health in Nairobi. So those are the plans that we want to work on for the next 10 months.
Having grown by over 300% during the pandemic, the company recently announced the close of a $5 million series of funding, which is set to finance an expansion into Kenya.
And that story brings us to the end of this week's episode of Business Africa. We hope you've been inspired to make a gallant effort in the continent's economic recovery process. Stay tuned to Africanews for more business news. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.